The Rogue in Mr. Pandaria gets some really cool additions that just fill holes in that toolkit that is already pretty versatile. With many of the talents actually being ripped straight out of the Cataclysm talent trees, now available to all specs, just feels amazing. So if you absolutely love combat, but you really miss not having Shadow Step, well, you can do that now. Or if you really like Assassination, but you just love having Cheat Death from Subtlety, well, you can also do that as well now. As I work through all of these Mr. Pandaria class videos, there'll be a playlist in the description which will be Rogue only. So I'll fill the Rogue playlist out with talent changes, glyph changes, changes to each individual spec, and then a little bit of a short guide on the basics of how to play each spec. So basically you can go into dungeons at level 90 and hit the ground running. So even if Rogue isn't the class for you, don't worry, I'll be getting through every single class and spec over the coming months, so be sure to subscribe, and while you're down there, hit a little like on this video, and drop me a comment telling me what your favourite change is, if you can be bothered. I mean, if you can't, don't worry about it. Anyway, let's get into the talents. Now, I'm sure you're aware, because if you're watching this video, you've probably already been doing a bit of research, but the talent system changes in Mr. Pandaria from how it is in Cataclysm, where now every 15 levels, you get a choice of one of 3 talents, and you can very quickly change between them with Tomes of Clear Mind. The first row of talents for rogues all revolve around stealth and movement speed. The first option you're going to have is Night Stalker, which increases your movement speed while stealth by 20%, and the damage your abilities deal while stealth by 50%. I kid you not, put this on top of another talent we're going to talk about, and you can move at epic ground mount speed while stealthed 100% of the time. It's absolutely bonkers. But don't worry, we're going to get to that. First of all, though, a decent talent option. Next up, though, is Subterfuge. So your stealth breaks 3 seconds after dealing or receiving hostile actions, rather than doing so immediately. Now, that is particularly good for Subtlety, and we'll get onto that in a second once we've covered this entire row. Because finally, we've got Shadow Focus, where abilities cost 75% less energy while you're stealthed. So basically, you're going to get a nearly free ambush out at the beginning of every fight. And obviously, after Vanish as well. I should probably mention that. Now, between the 3, Night Stalker is going to be something you probably use just outside of raids or outside of dungeons, just when you're running around in the open world doing dailies or whatever, because doing a bit more damage is a lot less impactful, but moving around quicker is obviously nice. And then between the other 2, it just depends what spec you're playing. Subterfuge can be particularly good for getting a couple of ambushes out before you actually break stealth as something like Sub, whereas Shadow Focus for like combat and assassination, for example, where you can just get a pretty much free opening ability, is pretty nice. The next talents are more utility based. So first of all, we've got Deadly Throw, which you'll be well aware of what Deadly Throw is if you've played Rogue at any point in the last couple of years. But what it does in Mr. Pandaria specifically is it's a ranged finishing move that reduces the target's speed by 50% for 6 seconds. So it's a nice ranged slow to close a gap. But also, if you use it with over 3 combo points, it's going to interrupt spell casting and prevent any spell in that school from being cast. So on casters, it's a really good ranged interrupt as well. Next up, we've got Nerve Strike, where a successful kidney shot or cheap shot also reduces the damage dealt by the target by 50%. This is 25% on player targets, and healing done by the target by 10% for 6 seconds after the effect fades. So particularly good in PvP. In PvE, not really many circumstances where you're going to be worried about this. And then Combat Readiness, which again is probably something you're quite familiar with if you've played a lot of Rogue. It's on a 2-minute cooldown, and it's basically a defensive if you're being attacked by something. Because each enemy attack will deal 10% less damage, and each time you get attacked, this is going to stack, and it stacks up to 5 times. It lasts 20 seconds, but if 10 seconds elapse without any incoming weapon strikes, the state will fade. Quite honestly, as you see with all those 3, they're mainly PvP, and then you've got Combat Readiness, which you could use in PvE if for some reason a tank dies or something like that and you're getting attacked. It's something you can pop quickly to hopefully survive if, let's say, evasion's on cooldown. The next row at level 45 is more survival and self-sustainability. So first of all, you got Cheat Death, once again, something you won't be unfamiliar with, but now you can get it as every spec of Rogue. So an attack that would otherwise kill you will instead reduce you to no less than 10% of your maximum health, and damage taken will be reduced by 85% for 3 seconds. Now, this can only happen once every 90 seconds, but as we all know, there's great places that you can utilize Cheat Death to cheese certain mechanics. So again, it's probably going to be one that you're using quite often as all 3 specs of Rogue. Your other options are to get a new poison, which is Leeching Poison, which coats your weapon with a non-lethal poison that lasts 1 hour. Your melee attacks have a 50% chance to poison the target for 10 seconds, and your subsequent weapon strikes against the poison target will heal you for 10% of the damage done. And if you shiv while this poison's up, you instantly restore 5% of your health. Now, this is actually particularly good. If you're playing Cataclysm and you're a rogue at the moment and you've been doing those sort of final bosses of the legendary quest chain, so the one in Karazhan, for example, or the one in Gilneas, then you know actually having some self-healing would be really nice on those. So there's going to be some really good situations where you use this, more so in the outdoor world, because the actual constant healing, you're not going to need it in a raid. That's what your healers are there for. Better to have cheat death to save you from a potential one-shot if a tank dies or something like that. And then finally, elusiveness. Your feint ability also reduces all damage taken by 30% for 5 seconds. Now, feint still just reduces damage taken from AoE attacks by 50%, which every spec has in their toolkit, but now you can also use it as a real strong 30% damage reduction cooldown as well, and it lasts 5 seconds. Now, outside of cheat death, this one is obviously really, really useful, because on those fights where you're stacking and you're having to use raid cooldowns for big bursts of damage that are coming in, you know, even if it's not particularly frequent, it's every couple of minutes, then actually just helping your healers out by having a 30% DR up all the time is going to be really strong. Next up are your movement abilities, and now this is where I want to talk about Burst of Speed first. When you run Night Stalker and Burst of Speed together, your speed at all times is up to like 204%, which without guild perks or anything like that is actually faster than riding around on an epic mount, which is absolutely crazy because you can keep Burst of Speed up 100% of the time. Now, I absolutely love this. I think Burst of Speed is really, really useful. It does cost energy. So in a raid, when you need to move, you might not want to waste that energy on being able to move, you know, when you've got things like sprint and stuff like that that are free. But it does only cost 15 energy. It's a 70% movement speed increase for 4 seconds, and it does remove any movement slowing effects and does not break stealth. That's the big thing. So when you're stealthed and you've got Night Stalker and you're running around with Burst of Speed, honestly, it just feels so good. But yeah, just in general, being able to break slows with it, being able to use it as much as you want because it's got no cooldown. The only thing you're limited by is your energy. It's just a great talent. And then Shadow Step, which everybody by now probably knows what Shadow Step is. Again, it's great now that it's actually available to every single spec, no matter what spec you play. But on a 20-second cooldown, you just step through the shadows and appear behind the target, and movement is then increased by 70% for 2 seconds afterwards. Still absolutely solid, don't get me wrong. I still prefer Burst of Speed. And then finally, Cloak and Dagger. So your ambush, garrote, and cheap shot abilities can now be used from 40 yards away and will cause you to appear behind your target. So it's kind of like a passive Shadow Step. You're going to be at range, you're going to press ambush, it's going to more or less just teleport you straight to them like a Shadow Step, and then cast the ambush. So pretty good, really like easy, forget about it, just take the talent and you'll always teleport to the target when you use one of those abilities. But I think it removes a big element of control that you get from using either of the other talents, but if you haven't guessed it by now, I really like Burst of Speed. The level 75 talents are not particularly exciting. Again, a little bit more PvP in my opinion. But you've got Prey on the Weak, where when you disable an enemy with Kidney Shot, Cheap Shot, Gouge, Sap, or Blind, they suffer 10% increased damage from all sources for the duration of the effect. Paralytic Poison, which is again another non-lethal poison that lasts for an hour, and each strike's got a 20% chance of poisoning the enemy. This stacks 4 times on a single target, and upon a 4th application, the enemy will be stunned for 4 seconds. If you shiv with this poison on, it causes instant paralysis of an enemy's lower body, rooting them in place for 4 seconds. And then finally, Dirty Tricks, where your Gouge and Blind no longer have an energy cost and no longer break from damage dealt by your poison and bleed effects. So when you really think about it, there's not that many situations where any of these are that good in PvE, other than maybe that what I was using, what you could see there, which was Prey on the Weak. And that's purely because if I'm locking a caster down or something like that, I'm going to be able to do more damage to them. But honestly, any of these, there may be niche circumstances where you might actually need it in PvE. But I see them as kind of optional / PvP talents. But for PvP, all 3 of them in certain situations are going to be really, really strong. And then finally, the level 90 talents. And in my opinion, there's one clear winner here, but the options between 2 of them can be quite close. So first of all, you've got Shuriken Toss, which is a ranged attack that deals X amount of physical damage to an enemy target. It's got a 30-yard range with a 40 energy cost, by the way. And if the target's further than 10 yards away, your auto attacks will be replaced with ranged shuriken for up to 10 seconds, granting them a 30-yard range. Shurikens are coated in your lethal poison, and this awards 1 combo point, so this replaces throw. Now, I'll be honest, it's great. It even sounds amazing. You're like, oh my god, I can become a ranged rogue, but it's only really good in really niche circumstances, and I'll be completely honest with you, sat here, I can't think of a single boss where I would actually use this, where the boss is out of range for that long, where it's going to be better than either of the other talents. But it's still a really solid talent either way, and I'm sure it's going to be something that you play around with. Mark for Death is on a 1-minute cooldown, and it marks the target, instantly generating 5 combo points on them. If the target dies within 1 minute, Mark for Death's cooldown is reset. So this is going to be absolutely amazing on ad fights. It's quite clear because you could very quickly Mark for Death them, use a finisher, they might die pretty quickly if everyone's focusing on the same target. You've instantly got 5 combo points again for the next target because Mark for Death is constantly resetting. Outside of ad fights, you're rarely ever going to use it on a single target boss fight because honestly, when we talk about it in a second, anticipation is just so strong for all 3 specs. I would just say there's very few circumstances or very few raid bosses where the targets are dying quick enough that actually getting those 5 combo points constantly is going to be actually stronger than anticipation. Which leads us to anticipation. It's lovely because it's a passive, so it's something you don't even need to worry about or use. But when one of your attacks generate a combo point on a target that already has 5 combo points, you gain an anticipation charge up to a maximum of 5. When you perform an offensive finishing move on an enemy, any anticipation charges are consumed to grant you an equal number of combo points on the target. Now, I think it's pretty clear why this is so good. You'll just never ever waste any combo points. If you're going over the cap of 5 because you're sub and you're getting extra points from Honor Amongst Thieves or your assassination and Seal Fate's giving you lots of combo points that's putting you over, it feels so good. So you've not got to worry about going over 5 combo points, and it just means you can get from one finisher to the next a lot quicker. Now again, outside of really heavy ad fights, anticipation is something that I would be using absolutely all the time for all 3 specs. And I've got to be honest, even on ad fights, I would still be using anticipation. Because unless the entire fight is ads, like something like Will of the Emperor, having anticipation for those points of time where you're actually on the boss is still going to outweigh the damage from the little bit of ad damage you was getting out by resetting that Mark for Death and getting more 5 combo point finishers. But yeah, I think overall the rogue talents are absolutely amazing, and there's a lot of choices there. It is a little bit of a shame, if I'm completely honest, with the amount of PvP talents there are, so I would say actually out of all the classes that we've looked at so far, there's a lot fewer options when it comes to PvE for rogues, but if you're a PvP rogue, you're going to absolutely love it. So if you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe. I'm going to go into all of the different changes for rogues for each spec. I'll break each video down by spec, so it gives you a bit of a better idea, or if you're not interested in combat, you ain't got to watch the combat video, you can just watch the other 2. You know, it just gives you options. So again, if you enjoyed, be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one.